AI is everywhere, rapidly evolving with endless possibilities. With AI data, centers rapidly increasing their energy consumption. Joining us for a more in-depth conversation about the nexus between energy and AI are Todd O'Hare, CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce, and Max Izagari, President of Izagari LLC. Please welcome Todd and Max.
Well, thank you. And Max and I met each other, it was a little over a year ago. And he said, you know what, we should catch up and talk a little bit. And at that time, we got together and we had a little conversation and got to know each other a little bit. And as I learned about your background, I was really intrigued and recognized that, you know, we've got a real asset in you in choosing Montana to be your home. And so can you tell us a little bit first kind of about your transition to Montana and kind of what that looked like? I thought that was kind of an interesting story. And then give us a little background about yourself and what gives you sort of the background to talk about this energy and AI issue that we're talking about.
Sure, and want to start off by thanking the governor and you for having me and also your staffs. I know that preparing something like this is juggling, grenades the size of pineapples, so thank you to all of them as well. In terms of my story getting here, it was not the Yellowstone series. Surprisingly, it was actually Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. I come from 7 generations of cattle ranchers in South Texas. My grandfather was the last one that was the 100% cattle rancher. And so I always had a fascination with the idea of Montana. Came up here to fish with my older son, and at that point it was game, set, match. And so I guess, Governor, I'm Texan by birth and Montanan by choice. So, you'd have to dynamite me out of here now. In terms of my career, I started off as a corporate finance and merger and acquisition lawyer, but then transitioned into being CEO of a number of companies that developed power plants all over this hemisphere. And also a couple of companies I ran built transmission distribution infrastructure. And so at that time, if you'd tell anybody what you're doing, you'd see their eyes glaze over. And suddenly electricity is such the hot topic. I'm currently on 4 public boards. One of them is a company that has transitioned from being a traditional oil field service company to now selling over 1 gigawatt of power to one of the hyperscalers. So I'm kind of right in the middle of that game. And then also I was chairman of the Texas Public Utility Commission at the time that we opened our retail electric market from the regulated model to the competitive model. And so, when I think about where we are today, whoever came up with the phrase, the more things change, the more they stay the same, clearly didn't see this one coming. And when I was developing power plants, if we sold 500 megawatts to an entire country, you'd be buying drinks for everybody in here, right? And suddenly, now, like I said, we're selling over 1 gigawatt to a single company that is still mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. And we've touched on it here throughout the day, this AI, right, energy need, which is relatively new in the conversations that we're having. It wasn't that many years ago that this was not part of the conversation. In fact, when you and I met, you were headed to a conference in Chicago or Minneapolis to talk exactly about this issue, about this nexus between the demand that AI is generating and how we're going to meet that demand. Can you kind of walk through that a little bit?
Sure. It's still crazy to think that ChatGPT came out 3 years ago, and how much the world has changed since then. But, personally, I think that we're in a global arms race, both on AI and quantum. I know the topic today is AI, but quantum has its own very interesting set of issues in terms of its own electric consumption once it hits scale. But with AI, I do think it's critically important that we win that global arms race. for a number of reasons. And implicit in that are a lot of trade-offs. And we've heard a lot this morning about some of the trade-offs that come with it. And so, from the power sector perspective, there's such a timing mismatch, right? You can build an AI data center within a couple of years, certainly for grid power. ERCOT, which is the system operator I used to oversee at the PUC, is held out as the poster child for, moving fast, and that's 5 years to interconnect, and that's just not fast enough. As an industry, we need to figure out how to move faster.
So you see this going faster, this demand that we're experiencing and what's going on with it, you see that accelerating as we go forward?
Yes. I think from the electric side, it's a challenge. I'm optimistic we'll figure out a way out of it. We've always innovated our way out of problems in this country. So for those of you that are familiar with Stockdale's paradox, that's kind of where I'm at on it. But I do think that the AI demand will continue. The difference, a lot of people compare it to the dot-com times, et cetera. We're dealing with companies that have huge balance sheets, big earnings. It's just such a different situation. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that every single one of them is going to succeed. There's going to be roadkill along the way. But I think the demand is durable, and we need to figure out how to supply it. These companies basically need two things. They need chips and they need power. Without either of those, they're out of business. And at the moment, electric power is the bottleneck, and we got to figure out a way to move faster.
It's interesting, I was visiting with Molly Schwinn with Northwestern Energy during one of the breaks, and we were talking about kind of our history together, and we both worked for a coal mining company. I worked for a coal mining company for about 15 years, right, from about 2005 to about 2019. And Molly and I, we talked about the fact that where we are today as far as our electricity supply is no surprise to those of us that were in the coal industry for those years, right? We were talking that this day that we're living here today is going to come, and here we are. And so you're painting a little bit of a picture that we're behind. Can we overcome it? Can we overcome the sort of big challenge that we have, Max, given that we are behind, given the barriers to entry for electricity generation, both from a cost and from a time perspective? How do you feel about that as you look across the country and the work that you do in meeting this growing demand?
Yeah, and I am optimistic we will. I don't underestimate the challenge. And so what happened, right, in that time period, our electric demand was surprisingly flat. Right, and as you said, a lot of us were left scratching our heads as to how's this happening? Growing population, growing economy, how's our electric demand not tracking it? And a lot of it is we sent a lot of manufacturing offshore. I mean, everybody kind of knows the story. And so as a result, if you look back 4 or 5 years at Dominion's forward projection of demand, it was pretty flat. Now they're being asked to double in size. So we have a lot of making up to do. And in terms of some of those challenges, because again, I don't underestimate the challenges, permitting, which has been talked about a lot today, and we're making strides there, but we need to figure out how to come up with more objective criteria on permitting to where litigation doesn't just stymie it. I'm a believer in doing it right, without a doubt, not suggesting we cut corners, but we also can't just allow the delay game to go on.
Yeah, and judicial climate, environment, this is a priority for the Montana Chamber. As we look into Montana and we see what's happening, the unpredictability that comes with the litigation and some of the rulings that we've seen on the Montana Supreme Court, this judicial reform is a top priority for us as we go forward. And so, Max, as someone that has moved here from Texas relatively recently, You have a different perspective of Montana than many of us that have been here a very long time. What do you see as kind of like the opportunities or the strengths that we have in this state in order to meet some of this challenge? Or as I like to say, it's like there's an opportunity here as well. As someone coming in relatively new here, what do you see as like some of our greatest strengths?
Yeah, somebody earlier was saying they wish they could rewind and start their career over, because I see a ton of opportunity. Natural resources, you have plentiful natural resources. Need to harness them, certainly, but the natural resources are there. Climate, machines don't like hot weather for the most part. I think 40% of AI data center energy cost is for cooling. So that's probably a 20 to 30% operational advantage that Montana has. You're not as subject to natural disasters as other states. Plentiful land, which is becoming more and more of an issue. And so all of those are structural advantages in my mind, right? Texas can't change its climate. Virginia can't create more land. And California can't do away with earthquake risk. So those are huge advantages.
Yeah, and I've read an article earlier in the year, and Ohio is making big efforts to try to attract data centers into Ohio. But one of the challenges that they're facing that you referenced is space, right? It's a very populated state. And so they don't have the space availability to build this. They may have some of the other pieces, but they don't have the space. And so there seems like this kind of great sort of conjunction of different sort of points that are really advantageous to Montana, for Montana, if we can figure out ways to capture it.
Yeah, absolutely. The structural advantages are there. Some of the things that are kind of, not structural, more within control are, again, the permitting process, incentive packages, workforce development. Those things have been talked about. But yeah, I do think that a lot of the if you look at Virginia right now, for example, I'd mentioned Dominion, they're basically full up. They had a lot of early success, but land is a big constraint there, as well as, again, electric power.
Yeah. So I don't want to get you too far into the speculation game, but nobody's really talked much about, the possibility of an AI bubble bursting here, right? And you touched on it, but I think it would be worth, since nobody else has really covered that point, can you give us kind of your thoughts on, are we in an AI bubble? Is this a bubble that is going to break? You mentioned there'll be some casualties, but are we in a bubble?
Yeah, so I'm not giving stock advice to anybody, but no, I think that a lot of people are comparing the current time that we're in to either the dot-com bust or the telecom overbuild. And I think that things are very different this go round. You've got, like I was saying, big companies, big balance sheets that are competing. I'm not seeing a lot of pets.com, webvan, boo.com type companies. The constraints right now are supply, not demand, right? With telecom, the telecom grid got overbuilt and the demand wasn't there. Right now, it's not that companies are looking for additional workloads to push into GPUs. It's going the other way. Now, from a broader perspective, to kind of zoom out, the overall market is at a historic high. So you have to separate systemic market risk from idiosyncratic AI risk. So, is there the possibility of a more macro adjustment? Of course, you feel like you're toward the end of the cycle. But from AI itself, I don't think we're in a true real economy bubble. But without a doubt, there will be winners and losers. And one of the big questions on AI is, are we ultimately going to go to a winner-take-all? Jensen Huang of NVIDIA doesn't think so. He thinks we'll have one big generalist model and a number of smaller specialist models. And he's much smarter than I am in that perspective. But certainly the history of tech has been winner take all.
As we wrap up here, given your experience in the energy industry, specifically in electricity generation, the governor has a task force put together focused on this issue. Do you have some thoughts that we should be aware of as Montanans as we look to tackle this issue that we should try to avoid, that you may have seen in other states, things that we should be considering today to prepare for tomorrow?
Yes. So there's been a lot of talk about affordability and reliability, and to me, that comes down to supply and demand, right? Nancy was saying earlier she loves supply and demand jokes. Well, Senator Phil Graham from Texas used to say, in economics, the only law you cannot repeal is the law of supply and demand. If supply isn't there and demand takes off, prices are only going one way. So a focus on demand, on the supply side rather, the pendulum, because of public policy as well as market demand, has really swung to where our mix has become more intermittent, and clearly we need more base load right now. That's just what the market is demanding, and that will also help with the affordability issue. And there's so much focus on generation. Transmission is equally important in my mind. There are ways to squeeze more juice from the orange through grid enhancement technologies, advanced reconductoring, dynamic line rating, that sort of thing. But we need to build the highways to get the tomatoes to market. We can't just focus only on generation.
Great. So I think with that, I think we'll call it a wrap, Max. And I want to thank you on behalf of the entire state of Montana. Welcome to Montana.
Thank you.
We're glad you chose this state. We look forward to having you and working with you. Please join me in thanking Max Izagari for joining us today.
Thanks to both Max and Todd. I want to take a minute to pull your attention to the program that you got today, and there are 2 pages that I'd like to quickly mention. First is page 24. I want to thank all of our members that are here today, and if you're not a member and something we've spoke about today resonates with you and you'd like to join, there is a QR code on that page for you to join. The other is page 19, which is a tribute to Dwayne Ankney, who was a great friend of energy in Montana. You can't be from Montana without knowing Dwayne. And so I would love it if we'd all just take a moment of silence in Dwayne's memory. I'm sure he's here today just smiling down on this conference. He was just a champion of energy.